Hey everyone, I'm Marcus Eng, and today, I'm going to teach you how to build Netflix's user interface for mobile and web using Flutter. You'll learn how to create reusable and responsive widgets that change their appearance and size based on the current screen size. You'll also learn how to integrate a video player into the web version of our app using the video player package. I'm really excited to show you how to build this project. Before we get started, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Flutter courses on my website, marcus-eng.com. In addition to teaching you how to build user interfaces, interact with local device storage and APIs, I also teach you how to implement a backend using Firebase by building multiple apps, from a Notes app, to Instagram, to real-time chat, so you can learn how to develop a full-stack mobile app. Also, only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you like my content, remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell. It really helps out the channel. And with that, I hope you enjoy the video. If you want to follow along, go to the GitHub repo linked in the description to download or clone the starter project. Switch to the starter project branch. Click on this dropdown and download the zip file. This project contains the mocked up data you need in order to follow this tutorial. Don't forget to start the repo while you're there. Once you download the starter project, open up your terminal. At the time of this recording, Flutter Web is supported on the beta channel. Type Flutter channel to see which channel you're currently on. Right now, I'm on the beta channel. If you need to switch to the beta channel, you can type in Flutter channel beta and then Flutter upgrade. Now let's run through our starter project. First, let's go into our pubspec.yaml file. And here we'll see I added two packages. First is video player, which allows us to play video on web and mobile. And the second package is Flutter block, which is a state management package that we're going to use to manage the state of our app bar later on in this video. Now, video player requires a little bit of setup that I've already done for us. Inside of our info.plist, I added the NS app transport security key. And inside of our main Android manifest.xml, I added internet permission. Let's take a look at our data.dart file. Data.dart contains all of our mocked up data that we're using within our app. This is the data we're using to display all the different content within our app, such as the content header, the previews, my list, Netflix originals, and trending down here. We also link out to an open source movie called Sintel, so we can play that video on the web version of our app. When you look through the data.dart file, you can see that I have a content model here, and also assets. First, let's take a look at content. And all this is just a class that has a name, image URL, title image URL, video URL, description, and color. If we go back to data.dart and take a look at assets, we can see that assets is just a class containing a bunch of static const strings, and this allows us to directly reference each of the images inside of our assets. Back in main.dart, I already cleaned it up and removed the default counter app, and I replaced the title with Flutter Netflix UI and set the home to scaffold. We can remove the debug banner by adding debug show checked mode banner and setting that to false. Let's also change our scaffold background color to black. And now for our home widget, instead of pointing to a scaffold, let's instead write home screen. And home screen is going to be a new widget that we create inside of our screens directory. Home screen is a stateful widget. And remember to import material.dart. For now, let's replace the container with a scaffold. Since we plan on creating multiple screens, we can create a barrel file inside of our screens directory called screens. And here we're going to just export homescreen.dart. So now if we go back to main.dart, we can see we have the error here for home screen. we can hover over it, hit quick fix, and instead of importing homescreen.dart, we can just import screens.dart. And this is really useful for when we want to access multiple screens within a file, but don't want to clog up the top of our file with a bunch of import statements. The first two widgets we're going to create are the custom app bar and the floating action button right here. For the custom app bar, we can see that the Netflix logo is on the left side, and then we have an expanded row widget that takes up the remaining width of the app bar, containing 3 different app bar buttons. For the floating action button, we just need to add a cast icon. Let's go into homescreen.dart, and first, we'll make the floating action button. Floating action button. The background color will be set to colors.gray, 850. The child will be const icon, icons.cast. And lastly, we need onPressed, which will print cast. For our custom app bar, let's scroll down a bit. App bar, it takes in a preferred size, and the preferred size of our app bar will be size, screen size, dot width, and the height will be 50.0. We can create the screen size variable at the top of our build function, final size screen size, and we can access media query dot of context dot size, and this is going to give us the current size of our screen. So now that we declared a preferred size with a size of screen size dot width, which is the full width of the screen, and a height of 50, we need to add a child to this. So the child will be a custom app bar. And this is a new widget we're going to write inside of a folder called widgets. Here we can first make the barrel file, widgets.dart, and we'll export custom app bar.dart, and our custom app bar file, custom app bar.dart. This is a stateless widget called custom app bar, and we need to import material. In home screen, we need to import widgets.dart. And now the error went away. For our custom app bar, let's first define a color. And this will be a temporary color, so we can just see where we're working on the screen. The child will be a row widget. The first widget will be the Netflix logo, which we can get by doing image.asset assets, importing assets.dart, .netflix logo 0. Hit save, and we can see that Netflix logo is pretty big. So if we go up to our container, we can add some padding, const edge insets.symmetric, vertical 10.0, horizontal 24.0. And that decreased the size of our logo by a tiny bit. To remove the Netflix logo from the status bar, we can wrap the row widget in a safe area. And now it's in a good spot. Now let's add a size box for some spacing. And here we're going to add another row widget with children. And this will just be a clickable text widget. So we'll have gesture detector, on tap. For now, we'll just print TV shows. The child will be a text widget, TV shows, style const text style, color will be colors.white, font size 16.0, and the font weight we'll set to fontweight.w600. And now for the rest of the app bar buttons, we could just copy paste this 2 more times. But if we do that, we're just repeating ourselves 3 times. So instead, let's extract it into a different widget, which will be a private stateless widget called app bar button. And the reason we make it private is because we're only going to be accessing the stateless widget within this file. app bar button will take in a final string title and a final function on tap. We can generate the constructor, and inside the build function, we can paste what we wrote above. Replace onTap with onTap, and the text, we can replace it with title. And now if we scroll up, we can remove the gesture detector here, and just type in app bar button with the title TV shows. On tap, we'll have it print out TV shows. Let's copy paste this 2 more times. The next button will be movies, and the final button will be my list. Right now we see that all the buttons are very close to each other. To fix this, we can wrap our row widget in an expanded widget, and then set the main axis alignment of our row to main axis alignment dot space evenly. Now the color of our app bar is transparent when we're at the very top, but as we scroll down, it becomes black. And so we want it to have a nice fade effect. We can do this by having our custom app bar taking a final double scroll offset. And we'll make the scroll offset optional, setting it to 0.0 if it's not inputted. Now for the color, instead of returning colors.orange, we'll instead write colors.black.with opacity. And here we need to turn our scroll offset into a percentage. So we'll take our scroll offset, divide it by 350 pixels, and then we want to clamp it between 0 and 1, because opacity can only be between 0 and 1, and then cast it to a double. So what we're doing here is we're taking in a scroll offset, which will be 0 in the beginning. As the user scrolls down on our screen, the scroll offset will increase. We're dividing it by 350, because when our offset reaches 350, we want the app bar to be completely black. So if our scroll offset is greater than 350, and we get a number greater than 1 here, we clamp it back down to 1, so we don't receive an error for passing a value greater than 1 into with opacity. And then finally we cast it to a double, because with opacity takes in a double. You can change the 350 to whatever you want. As I was making the app, I just found that 350 was a good point for the app bar to fade to black. Let's go back to our home screen. Let's create our private scroll offset double, which will equal 0.0. The custom app bar will take in this variable. And now for the body of our home screen, we'll have a custom scroll view, which has a controller. And we need to instantiate a controller so we can access the scroll offset. Scroll controller will be a scroll controller. And now inside our init state, we can implement scroll controller equal to scroll controller. And here we want to add a listener to our scroll controller. So whenever the controller is scrolled, we set the state of our scroll offset equal to our scroll controller dot offset. And this is how we'll get the most up-to-date value for our scroll offset, which will then change our app bar's color. Also, don't forget to write the dispose method so we can dispose of our scroll controller. To test out our app bar, we can add slivers to our custom scroll view. And the first sliver we'll add is a sliver to box adapter, so we can add a container. We'll make the height 1000 with a colors.blue. And right now, even though our scaffold background is black, our app bar is actually transparent. So we can see the difference by setting colors.black in our custom app bar to a different color, such as colors.red. And now if we hot restart the app, and scroll down, we can see the app bar slowly gets more and more red. And once we reach the 350 pixel limit, the app bar is completely red. Let's change this back to black. Let's start working on our content header. This will be a stack widget with an image, and then we'll layer on top the Cintel title, and then a row widget containing vertical icon buttons, a play flat button, and another vertical icon button. We can replace container here with content header, and we're going to pass in featured content, which will be Cintel content from our data.dart file. Inside of widgets.dart, let's export content header.dart and then create the file content header.dart. This is a stateless widget, content header, import material, and it takes in a content called featured content. And once we generate our constructor, we can first remove the container here and replace it with a stack widget. The first item in our stack will be a container with a height of 500.0. And in order to add the Cintel image, we can do decoration box decoration, set the image to decoration image. Image will be asset image featured content dot image URL, and the fit will be box fit dot cover. And now we see the image appears. But if we take another look at our UI, we can see that the image is behind the app bar. And we can easily fix this by going back to our home screen, adding another parameter to our scaffold called extend body behind app bar, and setting this to true. Our content header also has a gradient overlaid on top of our image, and so we can see it goes from black to transparent from the bottom to the top. So over here, let's copy this container, paste it underneath. We'll leave the height as 500, and this time we'll have a box decoration that is constant, so it doesn't re-render whenever the widget tree rebuilds. Instead of an image, we need to set a gradient, linear gradient. The colors will be colors.black to colors.transparent. And we'll begin at alignment.bottom center and end at alignment.top center. Hit save, and now we get the nice gradient. Now let's work on adding the title. This will be a sized box with a width of 250 pixels. The child will be image.asset featured content.title image URL. We can see that the title is all the way at the top left of our simulator. So let's wrap our sized box in a positioned widget, setting bottom to 110.0. To center the title, we can just set the stack alignment to alignment.center. Now to add the final row to our content header, we'll add it underneath our size box here. This will need a position widget with left 0, right 0, and bottom 40.0. The reason we need to define left and right is because when we're dealing with a row widget, it needs to know how far to expand to the left and right. So by setting it to 0, our row widget will expand to the entire width of our screen. Child row, main axis alignment, we can set to space evenly. And for the children, we're going to have a widget called a vertical icon button that takes in icon, icons.add, a title, which is a string, and an on-tap, which for now will print my list. We also need another vertical icon button And this one will have title info and printout info. The icon button will be icons.info_outline. Let's create our vertical icon button inside of a new file called vertical icon button.dart. Inside of widgets.dart, let's export it. And now our vertical icon button is a stateless widget. It takes in the icon data, string title, and an onTap function. Inside of our build method, we're going to replace our container with a gesture detector. OnTap will be our OnTap call. The child will be a column widget with children icon. The color will be colors.white. We'll have a size box for spacing. And finally we have the text widget. Title style, const text style, colors.white, and the font weight will be fontweight.w600. And now if we go back into content, we can import widgets.dart. And now our two vertical icon buttons appear. For the play button, it's going to be in between our vertical icon buttons. And we're going to make this a widget called play button. The reason we're not writing it right in here is because we're actually going to need to have a responsive play button for the web version. So we can extract it as a widget right now. Stateless widget called play button. And this is just a flat button .icon with onPressed, prints play, color, colors.white, icon will be const icon, icons.play arrow, and we'll set the size to 30.0. And the reason we get an error is because I'm missing the label parameter. So let's add that in. Label const text. It'll say play, style, text style, font size 16.0, font weight.w600. Let's also add a little bit of padding. Const edge insets dot from left, top, right, bottom. Left will be 15.0, top will be 5.0, the right will be 20.0, and the bottom will be 5.0. And now we're all done with our content header. Next, let's work on creating our previews widget. This will be a column with the text previews. And here we're going to have a horizontal list view containing circular containers and also the title for each of these pieces of content. Let's go into homescreen.dart, and underneath our content header, we're going to add sliver padding. The padding will be edge insets.only, top 20.0, and the sliver will be a sliver to box adapter with the child previews. And previews is going to take in a title, previews, and a content list, which will just be previews. And previews is from data.dart. Let's go into widgets.dart, and we're going to export previews.dart, and then create the file. Previews is a stateless widget that takes in final string title and then a list of content. We're going to return a column with children. First we have the text, title, style, const text style, color will be colors.white, the font size will be 20.0, and then the font weight will be fontweight.bold. And I just noticed we have an error inside of homescreen.dart saying that I can't find previews, and that's because I misspelled previews and forgot the S. So once we tack that on, we can save, and previews appears. To make previews start on the left side, we can set the cross-axis alignment of our column to cross-axis alignment.start. We can add padding to our text, and here we're going to have it be symmetric with horizontal 24.0. Our list view builder will be wrapped inside of a container so it knows how big to be. The height will set to 165. Child list view builder. Item count will be content list.length. And the scroll direction will be axis.horizontal. We'll also add some padding to our list view builder. Const edge insets dot symmetric, vertical 12.0, horizontal 8.0. Now inside of our item builder, we first need to extract each piece of content. So final content is equal to content list sub index. We're going to first return a gesture detector, and this will print out the name of the content when we tap it. Next we have a stack widget, so we can put the circular container underneath the title image. Container. Margins will set to const edge insets dot symmetric, horizontal 16.0. We'll set the height to 130 and the width to 130. And for now, we're going to just return the color so we can see where we're working. And this time we'll make it purple. And now our initial skeleton of our preview show up. Let's remove the color, and we'll set a decoration with box decoration, image, decoration image. Image will be asset, image, content.image URL. And then for the fit, it'll be boxfit.cover. To make these images rounded, we can set the shape of our box decoration, boxshape.circle. And then to add a border, we can set it to border.all. Color will be content.color, and then the width will be 4.0. And now we have our colorful borders. Now let's add the title image to each of these shows. Positioned, left will be 0, right will be 0, and the bottom will also be 0. The child will be a sized box with a height of 60.0, and the child is just going to be the image asset, content.title image URL. And now all of the titles are appearing. Now this looks a bit strange because our titles are blending in with our images. So to fix this, we can add a gradient starting from the bottom and going to the top. This will make the bottom of the image a bit darker, and it'll make the titles easier to read. So let's copy the container we just wrote, and we can paste it below. This time we can remove the margin. The height can stay 130, the width can stay 130, and here we don't need the image anymore. Instead we're going to have a gradient, and this will be a linear gradient with colors. Colors.black 87, colors.black 45, and then colors.transparent. We're going to add some stops to our linear gradient so we can control where we want the darkest parts of the gradient to be. We'll have it start at 0, 0.25, and then 1. Begin will be alignment.bottom-center, and end will be alignment.top-center. Hit save. We can see that the circle is a little off, and that's because our stack needs to have an alignment of alignment.center. And now it fixed itself. The titles are much easier to read now. For the rest of our horizontal list views in the app, we're going to be creating a widget called Content List. And this will display the header text and the list of content. We can see that Netflix Originals also has a similar layout, so that's why we can use the same content list component and just take in a boolean called isOriginals, and based on that boolean, we can render the different height and width of each of these images. And trending down here is also a content list. Inside of home screen, we can add another sliver to box adapter underneath sliver padding. This time the child will be content list, taking in title, my list. Content list will be my list from data.dart. Let's copy this 2 more times. The second content list will be Netflix Originals. Content list will be Originals. And we'll set the optional parameter isOriginals to true. For our last content list, this will say trending, and the content list we pass in will just be trending. Inside widgets.dart, let's export content list.dart. Create content list.dart. This is a stateless widget, content list, material, and we know it takes in the title, the list of content, and a boolean is originals. Once we generate the constructor, we can remove @required from this.isOriginals because isOriginals is not required. Instead it's optional, and we'll set it to false by default. To save time, let's go back into previews.dart, and we can copy the first part of this. So from column down to padding, and we'll replace the container inside of content list. And now in our simulator, we can see we have my list, Netflix Originals, and trending. Let's wrap our column in a padding widget to add some spacing. Where const edge insets dot symmetric will be vertical 6.0. Now all we need to do is display the images. So underneath padding, we'll create our container with a height. And here we're going to check if isOriginals is true. And if it is, then we know that our container needs to be very big, so 500.0. Otherwise, if it's the smaller images, it could be 220.0. The child will be a list view builder, where the item count is content list.length. Padding will set to const edge insets dot symmetric, vertical 12.0, horizontal 16.0. And then we can't forget to set the scroll direction to axis.horizontal. Inside of our item builder, we need to get our piece of content. Here we're going to return a gesture detector, the onTap, print content.name. The child will be a container widget with margin const edge insets dot symmetric horizontal 8.0. The height will be isOriginals 400.0 versus 200.0. And then for width, we'll do the same thing, but 200.0 to 130.0. And then to display the image, we can just set decoration, box decoration, to image, decoration image, image, asset image, content.image URL. And the fit will be boxfit.cover. And now if we scroll down, we can see we have my list, Netflix Originals, which has much bigger images, and then the trending down here. Let's actually add some padding to the bottom of trending. So in home screen, we can wrap the sliver box adapter with sliver padding, padding const edge insets dot only, bottom 20.0, and replace child with sliver. And now we've finished populating our app with content. Let's add the bottom navigation bar to our app. Inside of our screens directory, we're going to add navscreen.dart. Make sure you export this. And navscreen is a stateful widget. Inside of main.dart, let's set home screen to navscreen. Navscreen is going to have a list of widgets or screens, where we have our home screen and then scaffold widgets. Our bottom navigation bar items need an icon and a title. So let's create that. Final map string icon data icons equal to const, and first we need home, which would be icons.home. Next we need search, icons.search, coming soon, icons.queue _play _next, downloads, icons.file download, and the last icon will be icons.menu. Finally, we need to have a current index variable so we know which screen to render from our screens list. Inside of our build function, let's replace the container with a scaffold. The body will be equal to screens current index. And now we're rendering our home screen. And our bottom navigation bar will be set to bottom navigation bar with items. And instead of passing in the items individually, we can just map our icons map we made above. Icons.map will get back the title as the key, and the value will be the icon. We need to create a map entry, passing the title, and then bottom navigation bar item, icon, size 30.0. The title will be text, title. And then to grab a list of bottom navigation bar items out of this map, we can do .values, .toList. And now when we hit save, we can see our bottom navigation bar appears. Let's set the current index of our bottom navigation bar to current index. We'll set the selected item color to colors.white. The selected font size will be 11.0. The unselected item color will be colors.gray. And then the unselected font size will also be 11.0. And then our onTap will give us an index in the callback, which we use to set state. Current index is equal to the new index we tapped on. When we tap on our bottom navigation bar, we can see there's an animation whenever we click a new icon. So let's set the type of our bottom navigation bar to bottom navigation bar type dot fixed. And now when I click, the icons do not animate. Finally, let's change the background color of our bottom navigation bar to colors.black. If we play around with our bottom navigation bar, we can see that there are some issues that arise now. For example, when we scroll down and then switch to a different tab, go back to home, we can see that we reset at the top of our screen instead of maintaining the last scroll position. If we scroll down and change these, we can at least see that preview is all the way on the right. Hit search, go back to home, the preview's reset. And that's because we're re-rendering the home screen at the moment. So first let's fix this, where we can switch from home search and then back to home. We need to add a key to our home screen and pass in the key page storage key home screen. And the page storage key will allow us to maintain the current scroll position when switching between tabs. Let's go into our home screen, and we need to create a constructor. Home screen takes in the key super key. And now let's save that, hot restart the app, and if I scroll down, switch to search, switch back to home, we can see I'm still in the same position. Now if I scroll down and change the previews here, change the my list, Netflix originals, switch tabs, we can see that the state was not maintained. To fix this, we can go into our home screen and add keys to each of our previews and our content lists. So we'll create a page storage key, previews. We'll do the same for my list, originals, and trending. Let's save that, hot restart. We'll scroll down, go to coming soon, come back to home, we're in the same position. Let's scroll this a bit. And now if we switch tabs and go back, we can see all of our positions are saved. Now the other issue that you may have noticed is when we're at the top, our app bar is transparent. But when we scroll, it becomes black. And now when we switch to a different screen and come back, the app bar is now transparent again until we move. Then it becomes solid. The reason for this is because when we're re-rendering the home screen, the scroll offset is set back to 0. In order to fix this, we either would have to lift up the state of our scroll offset into our nav screen and store it there, or we could use a state management tool like Block. For this tutorial, we're going to be using Block. Now, when using Block in VS Code, it's useful to have an extension called Block, which I highly recommend you install. Once you have that, we're going to go back to our lib folder and create a new folder called Qubits. Inside Qubits, we're going to create our barrel file, and here we're going to export a qubit called app.barcubit.dart. With the Block extension installed, we can right-click Qubits, select New Qubit, and then type in app_bar, and hit enter. This is going to generate a folder called Qubit with an app_bar qubit and an app_bar state. Let's rename Qubit to app_bar. And inside qubits.dart, we also need to add the folder path in here. So app_bar_qubit.dart. Now if you're familiar with Block, you know that blocks normally take in an event. That event gets sent to the block, and then the block converts that event into a state. And then based on the state, we can render a different UI. With Qubit, on the other hand, we skip the events and we talk directly with the block by hitting functions that we write in the block. And then the functions we call emit a new state, which we then use to render the UI. So qubits are basically just a simplified version of a block. The reason we're going to be using a qubit to store the scroll offset of our app bar is because we only have one event, which is when our scroll offset changes, and we don't need to keep a record of our events. Let's go back to our home screen, and we can break down what we're doing. First, we're going to be removing our scroll offset, since we don't need to use it anymore. We're going to be moving our scroll offset into our app bar qubit. So let's remove this. And now in app bar qubit, we also have app bar state, but since our app bar qubit is only going to be storing a double, we don't need the state at all. So let's remove this and remove part app bar state. We have app bar qubit extends a qubit of double. And now our app bar qubit, the first value we're going to yield for the double will be 0. And then we need to write a function that will set our new offset of our qubit. So we'll have void set offset, which will take in a double offset, and then emit the offset. And so whenever a new offset is emitted through our app bar qubit, we're going to be listening to those changes, and then update our app bar's opacity accordingly. Inside of homescreen.dart, we got rid of scroll offset, and now instead of setting the state, we're going to be accessing our qubit. And the way we can do that is by writing context.block app bar qubit. And now if we import qubits.dart, and we also need to import Flutter block, we can access the dot set offset function by doing dot set offset and then passing in our scroll controller dot offset. Let's remove the set state and then hit save. And now if we scroll down to where we pass in the scroll offset, in order to access the value of our app bar qubit, we need to wrap our custom app bar in a block builder. And this block builder has an app bar qubit, and the state will be a double because our qubit extends qubit double. Inside of the builder, we have the context, which is the build context, and the state, which is the double. And let's rename state to scroll offset so it's easier to understand. And here we just pass in our scroll offset. Now if we hit save and hot restart the app, we can see that we're getting an error. And the error is that no ancestor could be found starting from the context that was passed to. And that's because we're trying to access our app bar qubit, but we haven't actually provided the app bar qubit to the widget tree. So inside of our navscreen.dart, we need to wrap our screen's current index here with a new widget called block provider app bar qubit. And we can import Flutter block and our qubits.dart file. Our block provider requires a create function, and we'll set the context here to an underscore because we don't plan on using it. And then we just need to return an app bar qubit to instantiate it. And now if we hit save, hot restart the app, we can scroll. We see the app bar works and it becomes fully black. We can change screens, come back, and the app bar is still black. And that's because we're using our app bar qubit to store the scroll offset outside of our home screen. If we were to provide the app bar qubit inside of our screens here and wrap the home screen here in a block provider, then we would have the same issue as before, where when we scroll down, we change screens and change back, the app bar would be reset back to 0, because when this app bar qubit is instantiated, we have the super 0, which sets the qubit state to 0. If you're interested in learning more about block, make sure you check out the courses on my website. Now that we've finished the mobile version of our app, we can start working on the web version. To run the web version, you can type in Flutter, run -d, Chrome into the terminal, and just hit enter. This might take a second, but it'll run the Chrome version. However, since I'm using VS Code, I can actually select Chrome as a device by clicking the bottom right here, and then selecting Chrome, and then tapping F5. And once the browser launches, we can see our app loads. We can scroll down. The app bar fades from transparent to black. And then we have all of our UI elements we just created. Taking a look at our UI, we can see our widgets are different based on the screen size. So in web mode, we have an app bar with a different logo and also more app bar buttons. We also show a movie in web mode instead of just a still image. On mobile, we have the bottom navigation bar, while on desktop, we don't have the bottom navigation bar. So in order to make all these changes, we need to create another widget that will allow us to set up breakpoints for our app and render different UI based on the size of our screen. Let's go into widgets and export responsive.dart. And we're going to make a new widget called responsive. And this will be a stateless widget. Since I already wrote responsive in the previous Facebook tutorial, I'm going to copy it in here, and then we can go through it together. Responsive takes in 3 different widgets: mobile, tablet, and desktop. The mobile version is required, and the desktop version is required. This is because if we're rendering tablet UI, we may just want to render a mobile or a desktop UI. Next, we have 3 different static functions, and this is just checking the current context to see what the size of the screen is, and then seeing if the screen is mobile, tablet, or desktop. For mobile, we define that as less than 800 pixels. Tablet, we define that as between 800 and less than 1200. And then desktop, we define that as greater than or equal to 1200 pixels. Inside of the build for our responsive widget, we use a layout builder in order to access the constraints, and we use the max width of the constraints to see what the current screen size is. And if it's greater than or equal to 1200, then we just render the desktop widget we pass in. If it's greater than or equal to 800, then we render the tablet UI, but if the tablet UI is null, then we render the mobile UI. And then finally, we just render the mobile UI. So I'll give you a second to copy all this, and you can pause the video. The first widget we're going to make responsive is our bottom navigation bar. When we're in web mode, we don't want the bottom navigation bar to appear. However, if we go into tablet or mobile, we want the bottom navigation bar to be there. So to do this, let's go into our navscreen.dart, and we could wrap it in a responsive widget, but the issue with that is we're going to be returning null for desktop mode. And if we return null in a layout builder, which our responsive builder has, we're going to get an error. So inside of navscreen, we need to check responsive dot is desktop and pass in context. Remember to import widgets.dart. And the idea here is to check if responsive is not equal to desktop, then we want to return the bottom navigation bar. Otherwise, we return null. And by checking if responsive is not desktop, we're covering mobile and tablet. Let's check Chrome, and we can see it reloaded, and the bottom navigation bar disappeared. When we make this smaller, the bottom navigation bar appears, and we can click it. Now let's work on making the app bar responsive. So on mobile, we only have the Netflix logo here with 3 app bar buttons. But on web, we have a different Netflix logo, and then 5 app bar buttons, and then some icon buttons mixed with some app bar buttons. Inside of our custom app bar, let's go down to our build function. We can keep our container here, but everything from safe row down, we can consider as our mobile version. So here, let's make a responsive widget where we instantiate mobile, and this will be custom app bar mobile. Then we need desktop, custom app bar desktop. For mobile, we'll create a stateless widget, custom app bar mobile, and then return the safe area inside. For the desktop version, let's start by copying the mobile version, pasting it underneath, renaming mobile to desktop. And now for our Netflix logo, we're going to be using Netflix logo 1, which is the full Netflix logo spelled out. We can leave the const size box here, and then we can add in the other app bar buttons we need for the first half. So let's copy that and paste in 2 more. We'll change this one to home, and then this my list can be set to latest. And we can move home to the top of the children. Now if we hit save and look at our UI, we can see we have the Netflix logo, home, TV shows, movies, latest in my list. When we shrink it down, we see it changes to the other Netflix logo, and it has TV shows, movies, and my list. For this next part, we need to add another row. So let's copy paste the expanded widget underneath. And this time, we're going to have an icon button with padding edge insets.0. Icon will be icon, icons.search. Icon size will be 28.0. Color will be colors.white. And on pressed, we'll print out search. Next, our app bar button will be kids in all caps. And the next app bar button will be DVD in all caps. And finally, we need 2 more icon buttons instead of the 2 app bar buttons. The icon will be card, gift card, and we'll print out gift. And the other icon will be notifications, printing out notifications. And now we see we have our Netflix logo with the first part of our app bar and then the second row. But we should add some more spacing between these 2 rows. So let's throw in a const spacer widget between each of these expanded row widgets. And now we can see they're spaced out nicely. When we shrink it down, it turns to the old app bar, and when we make it larger, it gives us the new app bar. The final widget we're going to make responsive is our custom header. We need to turn this into this. Instead of having a static image, we want to actually use the video player package to play a video. We're also going to add a mute button, where you can tap this button to mute and unmute the audio. And then we need to add description text too. Let's go into our content header. And the first thing we're going to do is cut out our stack. Instead, we're going to have the responsive widget, where we define mobile as content header mobile. And for desktop, we render content header desktop. Both of these need to take in the featured content, so let's pass that in. And now for mobile, we can put it right underneath. Content header mobile. Paste in the stack in the build function. And then also take in the featured content. Let's copy content header mobile and paste it below. This time we'll change mobile to desktop. And now if we check the web version, we can see that everything's still rendering correctly. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is actually convert our content header desktop from a stateless widget into a stateful widget. The reason we need it to be stateful is because we need to manage having a video player controller to play videos, and also having a boolean for the mute button. So let's add both those in now. We need to instantiate a video player controller, and boolean is muted, which we'll set to true by default. Inside of the init state, we'll set video controller equal to video player controller dot network, and here we pass in the URL for Sintel. So widget.featuredcontent.video URL. And once this is initialized, we need to do .initialize .then. And here we're not using the then value, so we can put an underscore. And all we have to do is set state. We also want the video to autoplay as soon as the page loads, so we can do another chain operator with ... to play the video. Let's remember to dispose our video with video controller.dispose. And now we can start editing the UI. So our stack, we're going to wrap in a gesture detector. We want the on tap to pause and play the video based on if the video is playing or not. So we'll do video controller.value.isPlaying to check if it's playing, and then pause the video or play it accordingly. Next, we're going to set the stack alignment to the bottom left, because the title, the description, and the buttons will be on the bottom left of our stack. And let's take care of that first. So for now, let's erase both of our positioned widgets. And here we can create a new one, positioned. Left will be 60. The right will be 60. And the bottom will be 150. The child will be a column with children, cross-axis alignment dot start. And first we need to display the title, so size box, width 250.0. The child is an image.asset, widget.featuredcontent.title image URL. We'll have spacing with a size box, height 15.0. Next we'll have a text widget, widget.featuredcontent.description. And we want this text to have a shadow below it. So inside the style, we'll first set the text style, color to colors.white. Next we'll set the font size to 18.0. Font weight 500. And then shadows. We can create a shadow with a color, colors.black, offset 2.0, 4.0, and the blur radius will be 6.0. And let's take a quick look at our UI. We can see we have Sintel and the description. Following the position widget, let's add some more spacing with a size box with a height of 20.0. Here we'll make the row widget with the children. First will be the play button. Next we'll add another size box for more spacing. And then we need to have a flat button icon. So flat button.icon, on pressed, we will print more info. The icon will be icons.info outline. And the label will be set to text, more info. And the style will be text style, font size 16.0, and font weight.w600. And lastly, let's make the color of our button, colors.white. Now our flat button can't be const because we have a function here, but we can make the icon and the label constant so they don't re-render. For the last part of our row, let's add in the mute button. Let's add another size box here, this time with a width of 20.0. And down here we're going to check if the video controller .value .initialized. And this is to check if the video has been loaded or not. If the video has been loaded, then we want to return an icon button. And based on is muted, we want to return icons.volume off or icons.volume up. And we can remove the curly braces here. Next we'll set the color of the icon to colors.white. The icon size will be 30.0. On pressed will be set state. And inside set state, we'll check if is muted is true, and if it is, then we want video controller .set volume to 100. And if it's not true, that means we want to set video controller .set volume 0. And then we can set the value of is muted by setting is muted equal to video controller .value.volume and checking if it's equal to 0. So when the user presses this icon, it's first going to check if is muted is true. If it is, then we want the volume to play, so we'll set volume to 100. If it's false, then we set the volume to 0, and then is muted will be assigned accordingly. Now let's take another look at Chrome, and we can see we have our play, more info, and our mute button. We need to put this underneath the column, so I think what happened was that I put this one too far out, so let's copy our row widget and the size box and put it inside of our column here, so inside the children. And now if we hit save and check the UI again, this is how it should look. Finally, we need to make the video actually appear. So let's go up, and where we instantiate the first container, let's just erase this, and we're instead going to use aspect ratio. And aspect ratio will first check if controller.value.initialized, and then if it is initialized, we'll get the aspect ratio of our video. Otherwise, we're going to return an arbitrary value of 2.344. And you can mess around with this value to see which one works for you. The child will be a video controller, .value.initialized to check if it is initialized. And then if it is initialized, we want to return a video player, passing in the video controller. Otherwise, we want to return an image asset with the widget.featuredcontent.imageURL. So here, what we're doing is we're checking if the video is initialized, and if it is not initialized, then we want to just return a static image. And the only time the video would not be initialized is if the link didn't work. However, if the link works, then we return the video player widget, which will show the video. Let's also set the volume of our video to 0 when it is first instantiated, and we can do that by going into our init state again and adding the chain operator and setting the volume to 0. Let's take another look at our UI, and we can see the video doesn't play, and that's because we also need to add the .play here. Now let's save and hot restart the app, and the video appears and starts playing. We can tap to pause it, press again to play, click the button here to unmute it, and click again to mute it. The last thing we need to work on is our gradient container. We want the gradient to be the same size as our video controller's aspect ratio. So let's copy this, paste it below, copy our container, and then for the child we can paste the container in. Let's remove the height, because now the container will expand to the aspect ratio, and hot restart. Going back to the UI, the gradient looks pretty good. And now when we make it a little bigger, we can see for a second a line flashes across the screen at the very bottom of our video player. And it looks like there's a 1 pixel gap between our gradient and our video player. I'm not sure why this happens, but the way I fixed it was by wrapping the aspect ratio in a positioned widget and setting bottom to -1.0, left to 0, and right to 0. And now when I hit save, go to Chrome, and then resize our UI, I haven't seen any issues with the line at the bottom of our video player. The final thing we need to do to finish up our content header is fix the padding on our play button. Here we're going to check responsive.isDesktop, and we're going to check if responsive is not desktop. Then we want to return the padding we wrote before. Otherwise, we want to return new padding. This will be 25.0, 10.0, 30.0, and 10.0. And then we want to copy our edge insets here for the desktop version. And if we scroll up and go to our flat button, let's also add in the padding. Just paste that in. And let's set the size of our icon to 30.0. Now if we hit save and check out our UI, we can see our buttons are the same size now, and the video plays. And now we're all done with our Netflix app. We're able to create responsive UI. We turn into mobile mode. We created a custom app bar that fades as we scroll down. We have a featured image up here in our content header with the title, vertical icon buttons, and a play button. We created previews, and then a reusable content list widget that we can also use for Netflix originals, depending on a Boolean value. We added the bottom navigation bar, and when you go back to home, our state saves. When we go into web mode, we can see that the video starts playing. We have a mute button that we can tap to mute and tap to unmute. We can tap on the video to pause it, tap on the video again to play it, and we also made the custom app bar responsive based on the size of the screen. And that's all for this video. Remember to leave a like, subscribe, share this video, and start the repo on GitHub. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.